Welcome back. I'm Arnold Knight, filling in for Riz Khan. Today we're taking a look at the world of organized crime. I'm joined by Misha Glenny in New York, author of the book McMafia, and Dennis Lormel, former FBI agent and currently of the corporate security firm Corporate Risk International. Dennis, we were talking there about the vacuum that exists in some changing societies, the vacuum in law enforcement, which has enabled, big crime syndicates to flourish. Have you found that to be the experience as well in your work?
Well, in part, yeah. I think part of the trouble that you have is that these organized crime syndicates have the ability to be proactive, and law enforcement, more often than not, is reactive. And that gives the criminal element a tremendous advantage in being able to continue their operations and to really to enhance their operations.
Misha, I want to go to an email which we received here, and this was from Miranda in the Netherlands. And she wants to know, do we have any reliable figures as to how many billion, and I presume she means dollars, is being generated annually by the McMafia, as you call them?
Well, I look at what I call the shadow economy rather than the specifically organized crime, which it's almost impossible to identify with any accuracy. And within that concept of the shadow economy, I include, along with organized crime, corruption, which really greases the wheels of much organized criminal activity, tax evasion, and corporate fraud. And if you bring together and collate the figures culled from institutions like the World Bank and from various academic institutions which are trying to measure the shadow economy, then you come up with a figure of about 15% of global GDP, which is in something now in the region of sort of $16 to $18 trillion. My figures were taken from looking at the year 2003, 2004, so they're a little out of date, but I don't suppose that the percentage is much greater or lower than that now.
But the amounts would be greater, wouldn't it?
Well, the actual amounts, but in percentage terms, yes. Right. And when I refer to sort of $16 to $18 trillion, we're talking contemporary. That's roughly what we'll be looking at now. We know that corruption in itself, according to a very extensive United Nations survey recently published, accounts for between $2 and $3 trillion around the world. But corruption is often the facilitator for much bigger criminal operations.
Now, while you were researching this book, I would imagine you met with some pretty notorious characters. Did you at any time have any fear for your personal safety?
Look, when I was researching the book, I thought if I didn't go and meet some gangsters, find out what their methods were, what their motivation was, where they came from, then the book really would lack a critical authenticity. So I didn't go with the intention of trying to nail these people, and hand them over to law enforcement. I just wanted to understand their motives to get a better picture. I had worked a lot in the former Yugoslavia during the 1990s, during the wars, so I had been shot at, I'd been mortared, I'd been under artillery fire, and that was really, really frightening. When it came to meeting these characters, I took a long time negotiating these meetings, trying to set them up. I didn't want to put myself at unnecessary risk, so I didn't lie about what I was doing. Nonetheless, whenever I went to meet them, whether it was representatives of the FARC in Colombia, gangsters in Odessa, or drug dealers in townships in South Africa, I felt a mixture of real unease because I wasn't quite sure whether I'd be coming out of the situation again, but also, real curiosity and excitement as a journalist. And these characters, when they talked, they were absolutely fascinating. They had very illuminating stories to tell, and often you felt that things were much more grey than black and white that it sometimes looks from the outside.
Okay, let's get a call in from one of our viewers. This is Moses calling from Nigeria. Moses, go ahead with your question. Hello, Moses. We've lost Moses. Dennis, let me ask you this. One of the biggest industries in the world, if not the biggest industry after oil, would probably be the arms industry. Have you found that there is any role in that industry in organized crime? And it probably leads to some really frightening scenarios when criminal enterprises could get their hands on things like nuclear weapons and sell them to the highest bidder.
Right, right. Well, yeah. You know, unfortunately, that's a good point. And recently, Victor Boot was arrested in Thailand. And I think, Misha, you certainly know about Victor. He's probably the most notorious arms dealer in the world. And he was aligned with certainly organized crime elements. And you had Dawood Ibrahim in India. And he's another one who was close alike with Boot and others like that. So it's an area of tremendous concern, and there is certainly a lot of room for the government, for the international community to look at that problem and to really hopefully take some steps in alleviating it. Certainly the arrest of Boot was a step in that direction. And there is close monitoring.
If I can,
sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, if I can just come in on this, what's important about what Dennis is saying also is that the arms industry will link in to other illicit markets. So, for example, I mean, one of the places that Boot supplied in Africa was the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, the people who were buying the arms, the militias who were slaughtering quite literally millions of people, were paying for this by selling minerals mined in the conflict in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo and selling them into illicit markets through criminal gangs. And so you get combinations of illegal criminal markets with arms driving it and minerals making all the money. And this sort of thing, we really have to make people aware of the fact that some goods, like, for example, diamonds, have been fueling conflicts in places like Africa.
There was some attempt, though, made, I think it was the Kimberley Process, that tried to mark these diamonds to find out exactly where they came from, so they would not be used.
Absolutely. But why did the Kimberley, the important thing is why the Kimberley Process came about. It's because a small NGO, non-governmental organization in London called Global Witness went out to Angola, and at considerable personal risk to its members, they traced the whole trade of blood diamonds, of conflict diamonds, and then they took their findings to some sympathetic members of Congress in the United States, and that's what got the ball rolling that led to the Kimberley Process. If it hadn't have been for these individuals and this organization really putting their back into this work, we would probably still be buying a lot of blood diamonds today.
Dennis, you know, when we look at the efforts that are being made to combat international crime, aren't there some more conventional ways of combating international crime? Things like shutting down offshore banking centers, because a lot of the money from these criminal enterprises ends up in those accounts there.
Well, you know, that's a good question, and to a degree, yes. If you can go after the money and you can diminish their ability to move money, to launder money, and to use money, and have a good disruptive track, you can certainly hurt their ability to operate. And I think we see that in the terrorism side. Certainly, we did an awful lot when I was still in the Bureau, going after the terrorists after 9/11, different organizations, by trying to cut off their funding flows. And
the Patriot Act in the United States makes provision for that to some extent, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I think the Patriot Act was a very pivotal law and pivotal in our ability to go after terrorists, not only terrorists, but to be able to go after organized crime and to go after their money. The Patriot Act is definitely a very important moment.
Okay. Misha, we just have a minute left, and I want to get this email, and it's from Wojtek in Bulgaria, and he says, does your panel agree that an economic crime is capable of infiltrating and wreaking havoc on our democratic institutions? The recent episode in our country that involved the Interior Minister Rumen Petkov and his resignation amid the corruption scandal illustrate that point powerfully.
It does indeed. You know, Bulgaria was plagued by economic crime in the 1990s. It is still trying to recover from the damage wrought by that, and you should never underestimate how weak institutions can be subverted by economic crime, and how this can be translated into political crime as well.
And that's where we have to leave it. Misha Glenny in New York and Dennis Lomel, thanks for your time. On the next show, we look at U.S. diplomacy in the Middle East and why it's failed. Don't forget, if you have any thoughts about that or any other pressing issues, don't forget to send us your emails to riz@aljazeera.net. See you next time.